Welcome back, Defenders. Jake here. We're building towards something big. Russia plans to deploy up to 300,000 soldiers to Ukraine's border region. So the Russians at the moment are rearranging their entire war strategy around exploiting this Western policy that donated weapons can't be used on the territory of Russia. If you remember, the whole point of this special limited military operation is supposed to be the liberation of the Donbas region. But in the last 2.5 years, Russia has failed to capture the Donetsk Oblast. So now they're just rearranging their forces, their entire strategy, moving troops to Bryansk, Kursk, and Belgorod to attack Ukraine's northeastern border. They're doing this to create an asymmetrical war-fighting environment, where their forces are perfectly safe on their side of the border, and they can do whatever they want to the Ukrainians on the other side. Case in point, it's not just Ukraine's northeast. This is an S-400 air defense missile complex just on the Russian side of the border from Luhansk. This is only 155 kilometers from Ukrainian-controlled territory. An ATACMS missile could easily destroy this 800 million S-400 air defense complex. But Ukraine at the moment is being prevented from taking out this juicy target. So this is what the Russians are doing. They're putting their command posts, their ammunition depots, their fuel warehouses, their air defense systems just on their side of the border. So they're perfectly safe. This is insane. This policy has to change. So Western governments are sounding off one by one. Finland, Canada, Poland don't prohibit Ukraine from striking targets in Russia with their weapons. And here's the heavy hitter. France, President Macron. Ukraine must be allowed to strike bases on Russian territory from which missiles are being fired. This picture, this press conference might go down in history. Macron met with German Chancellor Scholz to talk about this policy and convince the Germans to change their position. And it looks like it might have worked. So let me share with you a little bit of this press conference in which President Macron just holds up a map, trying to explain to Chancellor Scholz that this policy must be changed.
Montre le sol ukrainien est attaqué de fait depuis des bases et qui sont en Russie. Alors comment on explique aux Ukrainiens qu'il va falloir protéger ces villes et au fond tout ce qu'on voit en ce moment autour de Kharkiv si on leur dit vous n'avez pas le droit d'atteindre le point d'où sont tirés les missiles? En fait, on leur dit on vous livre des armes mais vous ne pouvez pas vous défendre. Donc nous on reste exactement dans le même cadre. On pense qu'on doit leur permettre de neutraliser les sites militaires d'où sont tirés les missiles, et au fond les sites militaires depuis lesquels l'Ukraine est agressée, mais on ne doit pas permettre de toucher d'autres cibles en Russie, et évidemment des capacités civiles ou d'autres cibles militaires.
He's talking pretty fast, the subtitles are moving pretty fast, but he basically says, we owe it to Ukraine to allow them to strike back. It's their cities being destroyed. Case in point, this is the village of Vovchansk on the Russian border. Pre-war population, almost 18,000 people. And the Russians are just destroying every building and killing every person, with aviation staying entirely on the Russian side of the border, with artillery staying entirely on the Russian side of the border. Domestically produced drones by the Ukrainians are the only weapons they can really use now. And that's not enough to stop the destruction of their cities. So good news, I think President Macron convinced Chancellor Scholz to change Germany's position. That's what's being reported. Important shift from Olaf Scholz, a person familiar with the German government's position, confirms to Politico that the Chancellor did indeed mean with yesterday's remark that Ukraine could strike back with Western weapons on Russian soil. This is huge. So we've got the list. What countries have publicly declared it's okay for Ukraine to use their weapons on Russian territory. The UK, Sweden, France, Finland, Estonia, Latvia, Lithuania, Czechia, Poland, Canada, the Netherlands, and now Germany's a soft yes. Italy's a soft no. I don't think Italy really cares. So we know who remains, who is blocking this policy. And I know in the comments section people are curious. If France and the UK have already given permission, then why is it that British Storm Shadow cruise missiles and French Scalp cruise missiles currently aren't lighting up targets on Russian territory? And if you're European, you're not going to like this answer, but the United States, in effect, has a veto over the military decisions of other NATO countries. And if you're European, you might not know this. Who leads NATO forces in the event of a war? It's the Supreme Allied Commander of Europe. Leads NATO forces during wartime. Okay, who is the current Supreme Allied Commander of Europe who leads NATO forces during wartime? And it's currently this general, General Christopher Cavalli. And if we scroll down, he is the 20th Supreme Commander of European forces. And you can tell he's an American general, U.S. Army. But if we go back in time, who was the previous commander of European forces? It was this general from the U.S. Air Force, this general from the U.S. Army, U.S. Air Force, U.S. Navy, U.S. Army, U.S. Marine Corps, U.S. Air Force, U.S. Army, U.S. Army, and we can go all the way back to General Dwight D. Eisenhower being the first one in the early 1950s. So it's always an American general who's in charge of NATO in the event of a war, because the United States brings the most military assets to the battlefield. French and British and now Swedish and Finnish military forces are subordinate to our military chain of command in the event of a war with Russia. Somebody has to be in charge. There has to be a final person making these decisions. And currently it's this guy. And it's always going to be an American as long as the United States has the most military assets. So we need the United States to change this policy today. Pressed on strikes inside Russia, Blinken says the U.S. stance will adapt and adjust as necessary. This is a good sign. This is political speak. I don't think Secretary of State Blinken would give false hope if President Biden's final position was a hard no. So here's Secretary Blinken at a press conference. This is what he says. We haven't encouraged or enabled strikes outside of Ukraine, but Ukraine, as I've said before, has to make its own decisions about the best way to effectively defend itself. We're going to make sure that it has the equipment it needs to do that. And another hallmark of our support for Ukraine over these now more than 2 years has been to adapt. As the conditions have changed, as the battlefield has changed, as what Russia has done in terms of pursuing its aggression and escalation, we've adapted and adjusted too. And I'm confident we'll continue to do that. This is Secretary Blinken saying a change is coming. According to the New York Times, President Biden is edging toward what may prove to be one of the most consequential decisions in the Ukraine war, whether to reverse his ban on shooting American weapons into Russian territory. Now, I know what your next question is going to be. What's the holdup? What's there to think about? Why is this taking so long? And I guarantee you that the United States is not going to give a blanket approval for Ukraine to do whatever they want with American weapons on Russian territory. There will be some carve-outs. And I can give you some clear examples. For example, the United States is going to say under no circumstances can American Abrams tanks or Bradley infantry fighting vehicles invade Russia. no thunder runs to Moscow with American armored equipment. So American armored vehicles have to stay on the territory of Ukraine. The other concern is Russia has a lot of nuclear weapons, and they store them close to the Ukrainian border. So the United States, I'm sure right now, is generating a do not bomb this place list, and these are going to be nuclear weapon storage facilities. Under no circumstances can a GMLRS or an ATACMS hit one of Russia's nuclear storage sites. I don't know anyone who would object to this policy, but this information has to be given to Ukraine to prevent this from happening. The other condition is American weapons will never be allowed to strike Russia's oil refineries and energy infrastructure. There are lots of oil refineries and energy targets within ATACMS range of Ukraine's border. But the United States is never going to allow an artillery barrage on a civilian oil refinery where civilians are just showing up to work every day. Ukraine can still do whatever they want with their domestically produced drones, but no M777s are going to lay down an artillery barrage on a Russian oil refinery. The other serious concern is if Ukraine uses Patriot launchers to go after Russian jets, will they accidentally shoot down a commercial airline plane? Russia is still flying their stolen fleet of jets over Russian territory. And it's not just Russians on these planes. There are dual citizens and foreign nationals from other countries flying on domestic Russian flights close to the Ukrainian border. That's insane, but it's still happening. So the hypothetical, what if Ukraine accidentally shoots down a commercial flight in which Emirati citizens or Chinese citizens or German citizens are on that flight? That is the concern that Washington has, and they just want to communicate this and get clear guidance for what Ukraine can and can't do with air defense systems over the territory of Russia. There's also the city of Belgorod, and I don't think Ukraine is going to be allowed to hit whatever they want in a dense urban environment. For troops amassing close to the border, that's a no-brainer, but what do you do about the civilians of Belgorod? I don't see cluster munition variants of the ATACMS being allowed to rain down on this city. So once again, the policy has to be clear. Ukraine has to agree to everything, and then we're going to start lighting up this border region. And concerning civilians, the Russians do this on purpose. They're purposely embedding their military forces into civilian areas, using their own civilian population as meat shields. This is a war crime, but let me share you this clip. This is a Russian civilian bus that's been converted into a drone operations center for the Russian military.
Адреналин. Жидкость победы. Так, кто у нас? Ага. Такие типы ездят везде и вечно учатся. У нас 35-я армия, красавцы вообще. Сделали автобусов, наделали, они катаются по всей линии фронта. Сами летают, тут же останавливаются в полях. Генератор, зарядка батареи, все, конечно, предусмотрено. И попробуй вычислить этот автобус.
Once again, this is a war crime for the military to disguise themselves as a civilian bus in an urban area. But this is what Russia is using for their command centers for their drones. Putin says Western weapons striking Russia would have serious consequences. There's only one thing left Russia can do. They're doing everything else they can think of. And the remaining step is the use of a nuclear weapon. Putin, once again, is saber-rattling. But two can play that game. Yesterday, the United States did a circle round of Kaliningrad with American B-52 bombers. Here's the flight path. It took off from London. And these are two nuclear-capable B-52 Stratofortress bombers. each one capable of launching up to 20 AGM-86B subsonic nuclear air-launched cruise missiles. The timing of this exercise, of course, was planned months in advance. But the United States could have called it off. They could have not done this exercise this week. But President Biden went ahead with this fly around to Kaliningrad to send a message to the Russians. And that message is, nobody wins a nuclear war. If Russia uses a nuke, there will be a response from NATO. I don't think it'll be nuclear depending on what Russia does. But there's no benefits. There'd be no benefit on the battlefield. There'd be no benefit as far as Russia's international partners, maybe India and China. And if Russia escalates, NATO is going to have to stand up and take the next step, which would be pretty bad for the world. Let's not talk about tactics on the battlefield, and I have to share a couple clips. I've been seeing these clips for weeks now, but the Russians more and more are using motorcycles to assault Ukrainian defended positions. Russia is in lack of armored vehicles, and these are kamikaze runs. These are insane. I'll link these clips down below, but these attacks on motorcycles go as well as you would expect, given that they offer no protection. But I'll put two of these clips down below. They're pretty crazy to watch. And I want to share this meme. When the Russians invaded in 2022, they had T-90 tanks and BMP-3s. A year later, they're pulling stuff out of storage, T-55s and BMP-1s. Now that we're in 2024, it seriously is motorcycles and Chinese golf carts. So people are trying to project what will Russia be using in this war next year. And scooters and roller skates really isn't that far off based on the current trajectory. Let's get to some bad news for Russia. Ukraine hammers Russian airbase with missiles carrying cluster munitions. This was the ATACMS strike from 2 days ago. We didn't have the intelligence yet what was hit, but we found out. Prized Russian long-range radar system attacked in eastern Ukraine. The potential loss of the Nibu-M radar system would hamper Russia's ability to detect and track aerial threats, including ballistic missiles. So these drone attacks in Orsk and Krasnodar on the early warning radar systems, this is about clearing the skies for F-16s. Ukraine is deliberately doing everything they can this week and next week to get rid of Russia's ability to track and shoot down F-16s, which are arriving soon. This Nibu-M radar system for Russia, well, looked pretty expensive, but it's gone now. So here's the top story from last night. Ukraine used ATACMS to strike the ferry for the Kerch Strait Bridge. They didn't attack the bridge. I think Ukraine is convinced that ATACMS wouldn't bring the bridge down. But they blew up the ferry and sunk a couple ferry ships. Why would you destroy a ferry for a bridge when the bridge is still standing? The purpose of the ferry is when the bridge is closed or the bridge is down. So this is a clear sign that Ukraine knows something the general public doesn't yet. I think once these F-16s arrive, the first combat mission they will fly will be air-to-ground missiles launched at the Kerch Strait Bridge. F-16s are due to arrive in the skies over Ukraine in the next 2 weeks. So we might see this bridge go down. And I think F-16s are going to be what brings this bridge down. And Ukraine preemptively wanted to destroy the ferries. Brilliant. According to Russian media, Alibaba stops accepting rubles and shipping to Russia. Alibaba is the Chinese version of Amazon. And Alibaba Express has stopped accepting payments in rubles and no longer allows the delivery of orders to Russia. This is according to the Russian business newspaper Kommersant. And if true, thank you, China, but that's also pretty pathetic that a Chinese company basically decided to pull out of Russia before a lot of Western companies had done so. Russia to raise taxes on wealthy persons and companies to fund the war in Ukraine. Putin wanted to get through his election and his inauguration before going after his own power base. I can't imagine Putin's inner circle is happy about paying higher taxes for what benefit to them? I don't know. But this is the language that Putin is now using. Now that he's got his next 6-year term, this is what he's telling the Russian people every day. Everyone must work as if they're on the front line. Everyone must feel mobilized. Only this way will we achieve the goals we have set out in front of us. Any other way to work in these modern conditions is prohibited. It is necessary to establish close cooperation between all government bodies. The executors of national projects, exactly this will determine the effectiveness of our work. And only then will we achieve the objectives we place in front of us, as have already been said, and which are necessary for the country. I don't think Russians signed up for this 2.5 years ago. A generational struggle to support Putin's goals, his special limited military operation. I don't think Russians are going to be too happy about higher taxes and a lower standard of living while they're losing 1,000 soldiers a day for no gains in Ukraine. Let's get to the good news. General Dynamics has officially stood up a new factory in Texas to produce 155mm artillery shells. This will increase the U.S. rate of production from 36,000 a month to 57,000. This should really be already over 100,000 a month, but progress. Czech Republic to deliver first shipment of artillery shells to Ukraine within days. They're going to get about 100,000 shells for the month of June, and this will have a huge impact on the battlefield. Volvo's amphibious Bandwagen 202 vehicles sent to Ukraine from Latvia. Thank you so much to the people of Latvia. Portugal pledges 126 million defense assistance in security pact with Kyiv. Thank you so much to the amazing people of Portugal. Sweden announces a 1.3 billion aid package for Ukraine, their largest ever. Lots of good stuff in that package, but included is 2 Saab 340 AWACS. These are sky and sea surveillance planes for Ukraine's Air Force. And you can see all these pieces coming together this month. The purpose of this plane is to aid the F-16s in seeing deeper into Russian and occupied territory. So this has to be driving the Russians crazy. This is a really good plane, and this is going to help F-16s in the skies. Final couple clips I have for you. The first one's kind of a goofy one. I'm just going to go ahead and play it. And I want you to guess. What is happening in this video? A Ukrainian surveillance drone caught this on camera and was very perplexed. They did send a drone out there to destroy it, whatever it was. But when they got closer, they figured out what exactly is happening here. And the Russians, between two trench lines, they're using a bathtub and rope to pull supplies from one location to the other. I don't know. Do you think that's smart? But for the world's second most powerful military, this is pretty pathetic that they have to use stolen tubs and rope to get their soldiers food, water, and ammunition. So, pretty hilarious. Final clip I have for you is a Ukrainian soldier saying that his mother's prayers saved his life. A piece of shrapnel hit his helmet, and if he wasn't wearing the helmet, he might have died.
Мам, хочу вам сказати, що ваші молитви діють і дуже добре. Сьогодні ось у школу прилетів в каску. Каска мене спасла. Так що ваші молитви діють, мам. У мене все добре.
That's all for this update video. Glory to Ukraine, glory to the heroes. If you found this video informative, give me a thumbs up. Best way to support the channel. Comments and questions, let me know down below. I love hearing from you guys. Till the next video, keep defending the truth, keep defending democracy.